This type of problem shows up between 9 and 13% of the time on the AP Calc exam, so let's make sure we know how to do it. If you want to try the problem first on your own, pause the video now. Otherwise, let's go ahead and try it together. Let f be the increasing function defined by f of x is equal to x cubed plus 2x squared plus 4x plus 5, where f of -1 is equal to 2. Alright, so here is our polynomial, and when we're told that f of -1 is equal to 2, we know that this point of -1 comma 2 is a point on function f. Next, we're told that g is the inverse function of f. So if we know that we can write our original function for f of x as just f of x, how do you write the inverse of that? Well, the inverse of f of x is just going to be f inverse of x, but in this particular case, we're defining that as g of x. So let's go ahead and write it like this and say that's going to be g of x instead. For this problem, when we're talking about the inverse of x, we're just going to call that g of x. The question is which of the following is a correct expression for g prime of 2? Which is really just asking us what is the derivative of that g function when x is equal to 2. Now, an important property to know about inverse functions is that if we know that this f of x and g of x are inverses of each other, and this point of -1 comma 2 is a point that's on this f of x function, we can also go ahead and say from that we know that the point of 2 comma -1, where we switch the x and y value from this point, this is going to be a point on our function g, which is the inverse of f of x. So that's just a really important property to know about inverses, that if this point is on our original function, then if you reverse x and y, that's a definition of how inverse functions work, is going to be on the inverse function, or in this case, on g. Similarly, how we could write -1 comma 2 is f of -1 is equal to 2. It might be helpful to go ahead and say, well, we know that we can say that g of 2, I'm going to go ahead and plug that in just like this, is going to be equal to -1. Now, just a quick reminder, when we're dealing with inverses, if you write a composite function of a function with its inverse, like f of f inverse of x, you're always going to get x if that's true. So we can go ahead and write this equation. Now, remember, this f inverse of x, this right here is the same thing as g of x, so we can go ahead and say that f of g of x, make a little swap there, is equal to x. And if you take both sides of this equation, and you take the derivative of both sides, on the left side, we would go ahead and apply the chain rule. We would say that this would be f prime of g of x multiplied by the derivative of g of x, which is going to be g prime of x. And on the right side here, the derivative of x is just going to be 1. Now notice we're looking for this g prime of 2, so that's going to be this part right over here. So let's go ahead and divide both sides by this f prime of g of x to both sides so that we can get that g prime of x alone. So dividing both sides by that, we're going to get this g prime of x is going to be equal to 1 over this f prime of g of x. Alright, cool. So we have this g prime of x alone and isolated, just like what we're looking for all these different answer choices over here. And you can see that we do have this 1 over, which also matches kind of like our A and B options here. So hopefully it's going to be one of those. And what else do we know? Well, we do know that this g of 2 is equal to -1 here. So let's go ahead and plug in g of 2, and that's going to be equal to -1. So if we go ahead and make a substitution, we can say that this g prime of x is going to be equal to 1 over this f prime, and we're going to go ahead and put in a -1 here, since g of x, or g of 2 rather, is equal to -1. And so making a final substitution here for this g prime of x, we know g of x, this 2, is going to be the x value here. So if we go ahead and plug that in, we can say g prime of 2 is going to be equal to this 1 over f prime of -1. Looking at each of our answer choices, hopefully B makes the most sense. That'll be our answer.